Okay, good. You guys are really good at raising your hands. Would somebody look up Ezekiel 22:30? Okay, somebody with a loud voice, read that for me. Who's got that? If I don't see anybody raise your hand, I'm going to call somebody. Okay, you're right there. Or them. Okay, go for it. Go for it.
And I sought for a man among them, who should build up the wall and stand in the breach before me for the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found none.
We have a duty to each other to stand up when we see an injustice. I'm not going to get into how to stand up or why or when specifically, but there is a duty that every Christian has to stand up when you see an injustice happening around you. So, there you go.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. I didn't properly introduce Aaron, and some of you know him more than others. Aaron Wright serves in our Awana ministry. He also has been our softball coach when we've had softball teams. So some of us know him well, and he's just really a brutal competitor in fantasy football. So we've enjoyed getting to know him. But Aaron also has a really neat perspective on political things because of his local involvement, working as campaign manager for Lynn Westmoreland. And
I worked for a couple of years as campaign manager for Lynn Westmoreland when he was running for Congress the last time. Through that opportunity, was blessed to be able to work directly in a consulting role for the governor of Georgia when he was running for re-election. I ran a super PAC for now Senator David Perdue. Run campaigns in Connecticut and in South Carolina, and then now here. And I'm also still very active in local politics. I currently sit on the Fayette County Board of Elections.
right. And one of the things that Aaron said that I thought was so neat. He came up to me a couple of years ago at one of the other elections and said, just so you know, it's so important for all of us to be as involved as we can be. I've got contacts on both sides of the aisle, and I would be very happy to introduce anybody who needs a contact, and just want people to be involved, want Christians to be involved. And so anyway, I just thought that was really neat. So in a couple of weeks, Aaron is going to lead the class and basically give us practical ways to be involved. And so that's coming up. So, but we're limited here to this issue right now. So I'm in Salt Lake City a couple of weeks ago, and a plane delay. And two African American girls are sitting here, and they're really fired up. And it was right when the riots were going on in Charlotte, and they had been in the airport way too long and had watched way too much news, and they were really agitated about everything. And it was all bubbling up together. And I think they had taken in a whole injection of the Black Lives Matter philosophy and just ready to explode about how police officers were against black people, and they were concerned about their daughters, African American daughters and sons being raised and knowing that the police were out to get them. In a situation like that, how do we talk to people? David, you talk. You get your voice warm. You've got to go about a different issue in a second. What would you say to a person like that? A lot of emotion, we're not really having a totally intellectual conversation.
Besides thinking about changing seats?
This was just in the airport, so.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
If I had an opportunity to interact with them, I'd ask them what they thought was the basis for their distress, their emotional distress. and what was the process for resolving whatever those issues were in Charlotte, and ask him to consider how that would be resolved beside, kind of, without saying so, ruling out riots as a solution.
So yeah, that's very good. Yeah, they were very fired up. Like you said, it was bordering on irrational. So you weren't even really having a rational conversation. But I said, yeah, wasn't it interesting that it was an African American police officer that shot this person? And then they were just stunned. They sort of took the air out of them because that part they had missed. And so it's really interesting, because they're people. There have been, no doubt, there have been experiences, as Aaron said, where police officers, have more power than they have authority and have overstepped their bounds. We know that. We call this wrong and unjust. And yet now it seems like in our society there's this hair trigger reaction to anything that even remotely appears like it could be unjust. Where else would you go, Aaron?
I'd give you a couple of things. Number one, the Justice Department. No, I'm not going to go there, actually. I'm going to go with there's a black Harvard professor, extremely liberal man, but he came back not too long ago, and he, after conducting a lot of research, he said that the United States is the least racist Western type civilization in the world right now, in terms of just overall opportunities and overall, just general segregation between people based on the color of their skin. So I'll give you that, and then I'll also say that numerous studies by the Department of Justice under President Obama, I might add, have determined that there is a dramatic, what they call in law enforcement, differences in offending, differences in quantity of offenses. And so is there disproportionate police action against African Americans in this country versus other races? The answer to that question is yes. But is the answer to that, is the reason for that racism, or is that in differences in offending? People who are being brought up in a culture that does not have God's ideal in mind, running up against an authority in an emotional or in a self-preservatory type of way. The answer to that question is yes. They're running up against the authority because they are not in accordance with what the authority says that they should do more often than that of people in other cultures. So there's that. But then there comes to the question of that particular woman. And in dealing with voters and in dealing with other people that I come in contact with, if you've got somebody who is emotional, my wife is really good at this. I get emotional, and Pastor John will tell you in softball, anybody who's ever done anything with me knows that I can get pretty emotional. When somebody is very emotional, you don't make a reasoned argument at that person. You make an emotional argument at that person. And before you can convince somebody of something, before you can preach at somebody of something, you have to have their permission, their mental and emotional permission to change their mind. And the only way you get that is if they feel like you care about them. So if you've got somebody you're talking to who feels whatever way about, this, that, or the other, you have to let them know through your words and through your actions that you care about them as a person, that you value and respect their opinion. And then, once you've got their permission, then you can begin to introduce things like, well, you can start to talk about things like self-segregation and how cultures have begun to resegregate themselves for basically nasty reasons, basically racist reasons, reverse racism, whatever. You could bring in criminal statistics, you could bring in personal anecdotes, you can bring in whatever, but you have to have that person's emotional permission to change their mind before you can.
Practically speaking, I think that is a very wise word. And that was, I didn't think that through intentionally in the airport, but that's exactly what I did in just trying to listen and show love. And of course, like I said, these girls had, the flights had goofed up on them, and they were like 12 hours in the airport, so they were out of control. But as I did that, I had more and more opportunities to speak love and speak the gospel to these girls. And so what ended as like this really agitated turned out to be, hugs for Pastor Kratz, and thank you so much for talking to us, and you were the right person at the right time to help us in this time. So anyway, God was good, and I was only 3.5 hours in the airport, and I understood some of what they were saying. All right, we got one comment, but we actually need to move to the next topic. Yep. That's right. Okay, yep, soft answer turns away wrath, Proverbs 15:1. So, yeah, that's good. It is good to be sensitive. Let me just say one more thing, and then I'm going to give it to David to change topics on us. But just be sensitive. There are people who've had all kinds of different experiences, and this is an issue where people react sometimes out of their experiences more than the big picture. So Aaron just gave us some great statistics about the big picture. Like if you really think about it, this makes a lot of sense if you look at the clear arguments, but that doesn't change somebody's opinion if they've had a personal experience of an abusive authority figure or something like that, or their parents have and have passed it on to them. And so we want to be, in a case like this, quick to show love, quick to listen, to try to engage, and as Aaron said, almost earn the right then to have the conversations that will lead to a change in the future, as opposed to popping off with statistics when somebody's just kind of out of control. That's really going to end up making a bigger mess. Yeah. Anyway, that's a different topic. The international panel is next week. All right. So, okay, David Mead, one of our star elders. Let's change topics. All of our elders are stars. Let's change topics now and talk a little bit about religious liberty.
I'm no expert, which will become obvious as soon as I open my mouth. So just two things right at the very beginning. One is a reinforcement of what Aaron said, and that is, as we talk about these things, we're talking about things the way Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, under the sun. We understand that God is sovereign. We understand that he has ideals that are taught and inferred from Scripture, but there's a lot of the particulars regarding American politics that are not specific in Scripture. And so we're talking about things as they are in fallen humankind in our country, in our political system, which you just sort of multiply those as exponents, and that shows how we are today, quite fallen. The second one is just to remind us of this principle that Jesus said with regard to the law. When a lawyer asked him a question to test him, "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Now listen, and as my pastor mentor said, let your heart listen. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So regarding religious liberty in American politics, the Bible itself does not directly address religious liberty. In fact, until the law is given to the people of Israel, the Bible seems to assume that those who have a faith relationship with God have individual freedom to express their faith with no specific protection of governing authorities. The New Testament is written in a climate of limited religious tolerance in the Roman Empire. as the Christian faith develops in those early decades, there is growing cultural and institutional persecution of Christians and expression of their faith. In American governance, citizens have First Amendment rights. And the beginning of the First Amendment is this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This statement is clear that the government is prohibited from making laws establishing a state religion to the exclusion of others, and that it is wrong for the government to make laws prohibiting the free exercise of religion, at least in ways that do not impinge negatively upon the free exercise of others. So primarily, it's aimed at personal rights, not corporate or institutional rights. This is commonly assumed to be the basis for a principle often referred to as the separation of church and state, which that phrase, that term, is not found directly in the Constitution. That principle can be and is, in modern times, applied by courts and society in radically different ways. The First Amendment itself is a double-edged sword. It is made to protect our expression of religion, but it must likewise protect the expression of any other religion. That is the Supreme Court's decision to allow freedom of belief and opinion, but not of practice. So in 1879, the Supreme Court ruled in a case to outlaw polygamy, for instance, as an expression of religious freedom. So we have established that both biblically and in the history of law, in previous talks, that all laws have a legislation of morality in some way. We are right to be concerned with what moral basis or collected structure of morality informs our laws. Should the moral authority be an objective body of truth like the Bible or long-standing precedent of law? Or will that authority be the shifting winds of popular opinion or the social agenda of minority interest groups? The Bible does not speak directly about guarantees of religious freedom. That's sort of a general statement. We talked about personal religious freedom. It does, by precept and example, teach us to respect governmental authority, and that when civil authority and clear instruction from God's word conflict, we ought to obey God rather than men. Well, we then have to think about these considerations. While respecting human authority in government and the workplace, we should seek to be clear about our personal religious exercise versus seeking to legislate religious practice or belief on others. Number two, we should not be surprised with unbelieving society that is offended by or actively seeking to persecute biblical Christian values and practice. Number three, religious liberty issues will continue to be a flashpoint for us until Jesus comes. Number four, I recommend thoughtful consideration of the person of Daniel in the Bible as an example of choosing how and when to wisely take a stand. Now, this partly comes from my work in other countries. America, as a nation, has a tremendous amount of political and religious freedom compared to many other countries. And yet, Christians not only exist, but thrive, albeit in some cases, we would say underground, under the radar of the governing authorities and of the law, because they're doing what God wants them to do. They're trying to pursue that as best they can. In this particular climate, ramping up to the election in less than 2 months, less than a month, right? Mm-hmm. Then we need to think how to dialogue with people around us. And we already know, we've heard these stories because of previous reports in this series of how corporate rules and regulations are being impacted by the society and the general impressions of which direction it's going with regard to minority interest groups. And we're just going to feel that more and more. So I'll just leave it at that. That's sort of my statement, which is, now I'm ready to exit and leave and let you guys discuss it. But
Well, thank you. That's really important. Religious liberty goes lots of different directions. By the way, Kent is going to lead us in a discussion through the book of Daniel and all of Daniel's examples throughout, because Daniel really is a superb test case of how do you be involved in government where you've got a monarch, a king that's building a 90-foot statue of gold to himself. I mean, we don't quite have it there yet. So, wow, it's really amazing. So some people think differently about the founding of our country. I've given you this illustration before, that some people make our founding fathers like Bible characters. Some people make them all like pagan deists. And the truth is actually somewhere in the middle. It's kind of a mixture. You had some wonderful godly Christians as the founders of our country. You had some people that would be more deist. And then you also, though, had a culture of respect for Christianity and an assumption that even if we don't buy into the details of the miracles of Jesus, we absolutely believe the morality of the Bible. In fact, George Washington had made it pretty clear this kind of government that we have is only going to work assuming a Christian morality. Okay, you can be free, but that doesn't mean if everybody is just godless and immoral, this is going to work. It's not. You have to have a religious morality. That's why Thomas Jefferson, who actually took the miracles out of the Bible, the teachings of Jesus in his own Bible with a penknife, he still wanted people to go to church, which just seems like a total disconnect unless you assume the importance of Christian morality. Now, when you think of religious freedom in our country, do you think that means that religion has no place in government? So, some people want to say we're free from religion in our country, but is that the way we understand the government to work and the Constitution to work? What do you guys think?
I'll take that one. It seems fairly simple to my way of thinking, that you have to have, government is either going to be based on one of two things. It's either going to be based on power. I'm bigger, stronger, faster, prettier, more influential, whatever. And so therefore, I'm going to rule over you, and whatever I say goes. And so you have rulers like that, and there's no basis for any of their decisions based upon anything other than their own self-interest, their own emotions at any given time. Or you can have a government based on a higher form of authority. So if you're going to have a government based on a higher form of authority, that automatically implies that you're going to have some kind of a moral code, some kind of a faith in something larger than yourself. The first example I gave, he's having faith that there is no higher authority or higher power other than himself. And then the second option, you're having faith in something else. So you're either going to have faith or you're not. And you're going to believe in something or you're not. It's just a matter of what are you going to believe. And so all governments are based on some form of faith, and it's just a matter of whether or not your faith is true or not. So then it comes down to a discussion of truth. What is true? And this, again, you got all kinds of books and everything written on whether or not Christianity is the one true faith or not, but we obviously accept that it is, and America generally has in the past. So we're going to accept that the Bible is true. We're going to accept that these principles are the truth. We do have rights. We do have value. There is a such thing as a just authority. Then you can't go any other way than to say religion is an inherent cornerstone of a free and just society. Does that make sense?
Yes, a religion is, and so it's really good. And I appreciate what you said as well about the truthfulness of Christianity. Our country has assumed generally that it's true. It's kind of given it the benefit of the doubt. But throughout our country, we have tons of references to God, to the Bible, quotes from the Bible, things like that. And it is perfectly acceptable within our government to talk about God, to talk about Jesus, to talk about the Bible. Now, culture has changed, but that doesn't change the truthfulness of God and His Word. And so there's absolutely, if you look at it historically, if you look at it, just in terms of right and wrong, the concept of the United States being free from religion is absurd. Now, how about this one? Have you ever heard this? Even though our United States government in the First Amendment has said it can't establish a religion, do you know that our states are free to establish a religion? And that even when the Constitution was ratified, I don't know if we had 2 or 3 states that actually had a state religion. I mean, a version of Christianity, not just Christian religion, a denomination. See, when you think of our founders coming out of England, where they had a state church, I mean, that's what they didn't want to have. We didn't want to have a federal state church. But if you wanted to be a Congregationalist, move to Massachusetts, where that's the law of the land, that kind of thing. Just it's amazing. You kind of hear, you hear people talk as if the founders were so against religion, and that is just not the case at all. Religious freedom not only is a blessing to us, and the freedom for the gospel is what we should be most concerned for, but it helps everyone else as well. It's a foundational thing.
Yeah,
Luke?
I'd even go so far as to say government doesn't make any sense unless you have a higher authority. If you take it back, philosophically speaking, ideologically speaking, it doesn't make any sense to have a government without some kind of a higher authority that acknowledges the value of human life. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Anybody here? I've got something fun. Anybody here like Ravi Zacharias?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Everybody should raise their hand when I ask that. He's awesome. He likes G.K. Chesterton. Anybody ever heard G.K. Chesterton's famous quote? Raise your hand. Couple? Okay, I'm going to go through it real quick. This is having to do with someone who does not acknowledge the existence of a God, or God generally speaking. This person is a skeptic. He will not entirely trust anything. He has no loyalty, therefore he can never really be a revolutionist. And the fact that he doubts everything really gets in the way when he wants to denounce anything. For all denunciation implies a moral doctrine of some kind, and the modern revolutionist doubts not only the institution he denounces, but also the doctrine by which he denounces it. Thus, when he writes one book complaining about the imperial oppression that insults the purity of women, he then writes another book in which he insults it himself. He curses the Sultan because Christian girls lose their virginity, and then curses Mrs. Grundy because they keep it. As a politician, he'll cry out that war is a waste of life, and then as a philosopher will cry out that life is a waste of time. A pessimist will denounce the policeman for killing a peasant, and then go to a philosophical meeting and prove by the highest philosophical principles that the peasant ought to have killed himself. The man denounces marriage as a lie, and then denounces aristocratic profligates for treating it as a lie. He calls a flag a bauble, and then blames the oppressors of Poland or Ireland when they take away that bauble, that flag. The man of this school goes first to a political meeting where he complains that savages are treated as if they are beasts, and then he takes his hat and umbrella to a scientific meeting where he proves that they practically are beasts. In short, the modern revolutionist, being an infinite skeptic, has always engaged in undermining his own minds. In his book on politics, he attacks men for trampling on morality. Then in his book on ethics, he attacks morality for trampling on men. Therefore, the modern man in revolt has become practically useless for all purposes of revolt. By rebelling against everything, he has lost his right to rebel against anything. Without a truth, you can't do anything. You can't take a position.